Most people don't ruin their lives in one big decision. They do it in small ones that don't feel like a decision at all. This episode is about how temporary choices can become permanent direction, and why just because you can is not the same as you should. And to help you avoid this pattern, I'll give you one question that takes 3 seconds to ask yourself, but changes the habits that you create over time.
Welcome to the Live Right Now podcast with me, Allan. This is where mindfulness meets everyday life. Thanks for joining me for this reflection on living with intention. Let's talk about how we can live right now.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Allan, and welcome to Live Right Now. We tend to think that life shifts in moments that we can clearly point to. Obvious moments, like a big decision, a turning point, something we'll remember. But most of the time, that's not how it works. The real shaping happens in decisions that barely register at the time, if at all. And by the time we notice that there's a pattern, it's already been building long enough to have become a habit. That's what this episode is about. How the choices we make in the moment evolve into permanent patterns that become our life. There's a phrase you've probably heard. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. You can hear your mom saying it right now, right? It's pretty simple, but maybe not as obvious as it looks. It's not just a moral rule. At a deeper level, it's a filter for awareness. I learned this the hard way, through running. Early on, as I was training for a marathon, I twisted my ankle. Not catastrophic, but enough that I should have respected it more than I did. Every runner has heard the advice, don't run through the pain. So had I. But I didn't listen. I had a race coming up. I didn't want to lose my momentum, so I came back sooner than I probably should have. At the time, that decision felt like dedication. I'd committed so much time already, I couldn't just not do it. Partway through the race, it became clear. I wasn't going to make the full marathon distance. So I made the best call I could in the moment and took the turn for the half marathon instead. That felt like the responsible adjustment. And in many ways, it probably was. But even after making that correction, I still ended up unable to run for months. That stayed with me, and not just because my ankles still hurt to this day. It showed me something I hadn't fully understood before. Not every consequence waits for you to make a clearly wrong decision. Some consequences are already in motion before you recognize them. Nobody warns you when your life starts changing direction. There's no signal, there's no announcement, no moment where it's obvious that this small choice is the one that matters. We're all familiar with the 1% rule, the idea that making tiny, consistent 1% improvements each day leads to exponential growth over time. But it can work in reverse as well. Most of the time, the meaningful decisions in life don't arrive labeled that way. In fact, the impactful choices are usually not just a single decision, but a series of choices labeled as convenient, reasonable, even justified. And that's exactly where the trouble starts. You make 1,000 small decisions every day that don't feel important enough to examine. What you skip, what you delay, what you tolerate, what you push through when something in you is telling you to slow down. One by one, they feel harmless. You can easily explain any one of them away. But the danger isn't in the single decision, it's in what accumulates when those decisions repeat. Because repetition has direction, and direction over time becomes outcome. And once you see that accumulation operating in the background, you have to ask why we keep giving ourselves permission to repeat what we already know isn't serving us. The answer almost never involves uncertainty. Most people already know the smarter choice. The problem isn't knowing better. It's the conditions under which decisions actually get made. We don't override wisdom in calm, clear moments. We override it under pressure, when we're tired, stretched thin, or when the easier option is right there and the cost feels intangible enough to ignore. And pressure has a way of collapsing the decision. When we have time to think about it, we can ask ourselves both, can I do this and should I? But often, only the first part gets asked. And when the answer to that is yes, it feels like the permission we need. That's where most patterns start, not in obvious wrong turns, but in choices that never got the second part of the question. But I can is not the same as I should. And treating availability as permission is one of the insidious ways people drift from where they intended to go. There's a difference between what you can do and what you're capable of being. Can tells you what's available, says nothing about what's possible. When was the last time you found yourself scrolling on your phone thinking, I can do this for just a minute, only to look up what seems to be just minutes later to find that it's been hours? What could you have done with that time? Exercise? Read? Maybe get some overdue sleep. Access is not the same as permission. Just because it's there, we often find that's a good enough reason. We act as if that settles the question, but we ignore the real question. Does this belong in the life I want? That question sounds almost too simple, but it changes what you're evaluating. You're no longer asking whether something is there. You're asking whether it fits in your direction, in your values, in the you want to be. Ability is not the same thing as alignment, and knowing the difference is what separates living life from life happening to you. But knowing the difference between can and should isn't the same as doing something about it. That's the part that requires a different kind of awareness, because wisdom, in the real moments of decision, rarely arrives clearly. It usually arrives in disguise, as hesitation, a slight resistance, a sense that something doesn't quite fit, even when you can't explain why. The easy move, and the common one, is to explain it away, to generate a justification that's good enough to override the hesitation and move forward anyway. That's what pressure and convenience are very good at producing. But that signal is worth paying attention to. Not because it's always right, but because it's usually asking a question your rational mind hasn't fully formed yet. When I made the call to switch to the half marathon during that race, there was a version of that signal that had been present for a while. I was so busy getting to the race, I didn't stop to realize that I probably wasn't fully ready. Just hadn't been honest with myself about it. The correction was the right call, but the signal had been there earlier than I acted on it. Wisdom is always present within us. Our struggle is breaking the habit of silencing it before it can guide us. We look for aha moments, but what we get is a moment of pause, a hesitation before the justification, a slight resistance before the override. The question isn't whether that signal is there. For most people, in most moments, it is. The question is whether you're tuned into the right frequency to hear it. Because the gap between the life that you intend and the life you actually get isn't usually filled with wrong decisions. It's filled with moments where you heard something quiet and chose the louder, easier option instead. Staying tuned to that signal is the difference between becoming the product of your circumstances or the product of your decisions. So, how do we do this in real life? There's a pattern. Small decisions accumulating, can replacing should, wisdom arriving without fanfare, and getting overridden. Once you identify it, you don't need a dramatic response. You need a simple one. Before you jump to a choice that feels easy to justify but slightly off, pause long enough to ask one question. If I repeat this exact choice for the next 30 days, where does it take me? Not once, not as an exception, as a pattern. That question moves your attention from whether something is acceptable right now to where it takes you over time. And most of us, when we ask it honestly, already know the answer. The pause is just what makes space for that knowing to be heard. You don't have to examine every small decision, but the ones that carry that signal, the slight hesitation before the justification, those are the ones worth that 3 seconds of honest attention. That's where the accumulation either continues or changes, not in a turning point, in an ordinary moment where you pause just long enough to think about what you want to become. Thanks for spending some time thinking about this with me today. Until next time, pause and listen for the wisdom. Stay intentional, and remember to live right now.
Thanks for being part of Live Right Now. If you like what you've heard, I encourage you to like and follow the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration today. Join the conversation on our Facebook page or email me your thoughts at the address in the show notes. I'm Allan Haw. Until next time, make the most of every moment and remember to live right now.